There's nothing quite like the pain of being rejected by the people who should love you most. Imagine being thrown away by your own family, cast out into a frozen wilderness to die, simply because you couldn't give them what they wanted. This is what happened to Lady Elira when her noble family discovered she was barren. Left in the snow to freeze, she thought her story was over. But an ancient vampire named Kael found her broken body in the woods. For centuries, he'd been called a monster by everyone who knew his name. Yet when he saw this dying woman, abandoned and alone, something changed in his heart. He carried her to safety and nursed her back to health. What grew between them was something neither expected, two outcasts finding family in each other. But could their bond survive when her family came looking for her? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The golden threads of the Thornfield family crest caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows of the manor's great hall. Lady Elira traced the intricate embroidery with trembling fingers, remembering when she'd been so proud to wear that symbol. The griffin and oak tree represented 8 centuries of noble bloodline, a legacy that would die with her. "Pack only what you can carry." Her father's voice had been cold as winter stone. "You have until dawn." That was 3 hours ago. Now, as the first pale light crept across the frost-covered grounds, Elira folded the last of her belongings into a worn leather satchel. Her wedding ring, a band of white gold set with sapphires, lay heavy in her palm. She should leave it behind, she knew. It represented everything she could never be, everything she had failed to become. But she couldn't let it go. The ring had been her grandmother's, passed down through generations of Thornfield women who had all fulfilled their sacred duty, bearing sons to carry on the family name. Elira was the first to break that chain, the first to prove barren, despite 3 years of marriage to Lord Marcus of Ravenshallow. She remembered their wedding day with painful clarity. Marcus had been handsome in his ceremonial armour, his dark hair gleaming in the cathedral's candlelight. The entire kingdom had celebrated their union. 2 powerful houses joined in matrimony, promising a future filled with strong heirs and political stability. For the first year, they had been genuinely happy. Marcus was kind, patient, and gentle with her inexperience. Their chambers had been filled with laughter and whispered promises of the children they would raise together. Elira had spent hours planning the nursery, choosing fabrics and toys for the babies she was certain would come. The first miscarriage had been devastating but not uncommon. The castle's physician assured them that many women lost their first child. They grieved together and tried again with renewed hope. The second loss had been harder to bear. Marcus had held her as she wept, promising that their time would come. His family physician brought in specialists from the capital, wise women who knew the ancient arts of fertility and healing. By the third miscarriage, the whispers had begun. Servants spoke in hushed tones about curses and divine punishment. Marcus's mother suggested that perhaps the match had been a mistake, that the bloodlines were incompatible. The fourth pregnancy had never progressed beyond the first month. The fifth had lasted only weeks. Each loss carved deeper into Elira's soul, and she watched helplessly as Marcus's initial compassion transformed into frustration, then disappointment, and finally resignation. "Perhaps we should consider other options," he had said gently one evening, staring into the fireplace rather than meeting her eyes. "My cousin Harold has several sons. We could name one as heir." But Elira knew what he really meant. Other options included setting aside their marriage, finding him a wife who could give him what she could not. In their world, love was a luxury that noble families could rarely afford when bloodlines hung in the balance. The formal annulment had been swift and politically delicate. Marcus had been generous in the settlement, providing her with a small dowry and expressing his continued friendship. But everyone knew the truth. Lady Elira Thornfield was damaged goods, a woman who could not fulfill her most basic purpose. Her own family had received her back at Thornfield Manor with strained politeness. Her father, Lord Edmund, had aged considerably in the 3 years since her wedding. Her mother, Lady Catherine, had developed a nervous habit of wringing her hands whenever Elira entered a room. Her younger brother Thomas, heir to the Thornfield name, had treated her with the careful courtesy one might show a fragile invalid. For 6 months she had lived in a strange liminal space, neither maiden nor wife, neither daughter nor mother. She took meals in her old chamber, walked the gardens alone, and tried to imagine what her future might hold. Perhaps she could become a patron of the arts, or dedicate herself to charitable works among the poor. But noble families had little patience for members who served no strategic purpose. When King Aldric's nephew, Lord Garrett, had begun making inquiries about available wives, the pressure on Elira to somehow redeem herself had become unbearable. "You must understand our position," her father had explained during their final conversation. "The family needs political alliances. Thomas is still unmarried, and we need every advantage we can secure. Your continued presence here is a constant reminder of failure, not just yours, but ours as well." Her mother had wept quietly in the corner, but had not spoken against the decision. In their world, sentiment was a luxury they could not afford. "Where am I to go?" Elira had asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "There's a convent in the eastern provinces," Lady Catherine had suggested hopefully. "The sisters there are known for their kindness to women in difficult circumstances." But Lord Edmund had shaken his head. "We cannot be seen as endorsing the convent solution. It raises too many questions about why our daughter cannot marry again. No, she must disappear entirely. Let the world assume she died in some accident, a hunting mishap perhaps, or a fall from her horse." And so here she stood, in the pre-dawn darkness of her childhood home, preparing to walk out into the frozen wasteland that stretched beyond their lands. She had enough coin to last perhaps a month if she was careful, enough food for 3 days, and winter clothes that might keep her alive for a week in the brutal cold. She slipped the wedding ring into the small pouch at her waist, where it clinked softly against the few silver pieces her mother had secretly given her. It was not much, but it was all she had left of the woman she had once been. The great hall was empty as she made her way toward the servants' entrance. She could not bear to walk through the main doors, too many memories of grand entrances, of being announced at feasts and celebrations when she had been the pride of the Thornfield family. Outside, the wind cut through her woolen cloak like a blade. Snow had fallen steadily for 3 days, blanketing the world in white silence. Her boots crunched softly on the frozen ground as she made her way toward the forest path that would take her away from everything she had ever known. She did not look back. The ancient woods that bordered the Thornfield lands were said to be haunted by creatures from the old times, wolves larger than horses, spirits of the long dead, and worse things that had no names. But Elira felt no fear as she walked deeper into the shadows between the trees. What could the darkness do to her that had not already been done? 20 miles away, in the ruins of what had once been Castle Nighthaven, Kael felt the disturbance like a whisper in his blood. He had been in these lands for nearly 3 centuries, watching kingdoms rise and fall, witnessing the slow decay of the old magic that had once flowed freely through the world. The castle had been his sanctuary and his prison, grand enough to remind him of what he had lost, ruined enough to reflect what he had become. The great hall where he now sat had once hosted lavish banquets, attended by kings and princes. Tapestries depicting the noble history of House Nighthaven had adorned the walls, and crystal chandeliers had cast dancing light across polished marble floors. Now, roots pushed up through broken stones, and winter winds whistled through gaps in the ancient walls. Kael had been mortal once, though that seemed like a lifetime ago, which, he supposed, it was. He had been the youngest son of a powerful duke, trained in warfare and diplomacy, destined for a life of honor and service to his king. That was before the curse, before the transformation that had made him something the world could no longer accept. The vampire clans had their own rigid hierarchies and customs, but Kael had never found a place among them either. His human sensibilities had made him weak in their estimation, his reluctance to embrace the predatory nature of his new existence, marking him as an outcast even among monsters. So he had retreated to this forgotten corner of the world, sustaining himself on the blood of wild animals and the occasional bandit foolish enough to seek shelter in his ruins. It was a lonely existence, but it was peaceful. He had his books, those that had survived the centuries, and his memories, both bitter and sweet. But tonight, something was different. There was a presence in his territory, a heartbeat growing steadily weaker, a scent of despair that called to something deep within him that he had thought long dead. He rose from his chair by the cold fireplace, his supernatural senses tracking the source of the disturbance. A human, female, somewhere in the deep woods, beyond his outer walls. She was dying not from violence, but from cold and exhaustion and something deeper, something that felt painfully familiar. Kael had learned long ago not to involve himself in human affairs. They brought nothing but complications and heartache. Yet he found himself moving through the ruins of his castle, past chambers that had once housed his family, down corridors where he had run as a child, and out into the bitter night. The snow crunched beneath his feet as he moved through the forest with inhuman grace and speed. His vampire nature allowed him to see clearly in the darkness, to move silently despite his size, to track the failing heartbeat that drew him like a beacon. He found her collapsed beneath an ancient oak tree, her dark hair fanned across the snow like spilled ink. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24 years old, and even unconscious. Her face bore the refined features of noble birth. Her clothing was well made but practical, the garb of someone who had dressed for a journey rather than for court. But it was the expression on her face that made him pause. Even in unconsciousness, she looked peaceful rather than afraid. This was not someone who had been fleeing from danger, this was someone who had been fleeing toward it, seeking an end to whatever pain had driven her from warmth and safety into the killing cold. Kael knelt beside her still form, his enhanced hearing detecting the slow, irregular rhythm of her heart. She was minutes from death, her body temperature dropping rapidly in the bitter wind. He could walk away, let nature take its course, return to his solitude with no one the wiser. Instead, he found himself reaching for the bloodstone pendant that hung around his neck, a piece of ancient magic that had been in his family for generations. The stone, which had remained cold for decades, suddenly pulsed with warmth against his palm. Without fully understanding why, Kael gathered the unconscious woman into his arms and began the journey back to his castle. She weighed almost nothing, her body limp against his chest, and he was surprised by the protective instinct that rose within him as he carried her through the storm. Behind them, the wind quickly covered their tracks with fresh snow, erasing all evidence that Lady Elira Thornfield had ever passed that way. The bloodstone pendant grew warmer with each step Kael took toward his ruined castle, the ancient magic within it responding to something he had not felt in centuries: genuine compassion. He had forgotten that such emotions still lived within him, buried beneath layers of isolation and carefully constructed indifference. The woman in his arms stirred once during their journey, her lips moving soundlessly as if she were trying to speak. But she did not wake, and Kael was grateful for that small mercy. He had no idea how to explain to a dying noblewoman that she was being carried to safety by the very monster her bedtime stories had warned her about. Castle Nighthaven loomed ahead through the swirling snow, its broken towers and crumbling walls casting long shadows in the pale moonlight. Kael had not bothered to maintain most of the structure. What need did an immortal have for aesthetic beauty when there was no one to appreciate it? But he had kept a few chambers habitable, more out of habit than necessity. He carried her through what had once been the main courtyard, now overgrown with thorny vines that parted at his approach as if recognizing their master. The great doors stood permanently open. The wood had rotted away decades ago, but the inner chambers remained relatively protected from the elements. Ka'el made his way to what had been his mother's solar, a room he had preserved more carefully than the others. The furniture was covered in dust but intact, and a fireplace dominated one wall. More importantly, it contained the bed where his mother had recovered from her own long illness before the curse had claimed their family. He laid the unconscious woman gently on the bed, her pale skin stark against the dark coverlets. For a moment, he simply stood there, studying her face in the moonlight that streamed through the tall windows. She was beautiful in a fragile way that reminded him painfully of mortality, the kind of beauty that would fade with time, that was precious precisely because it was temporary. The bloodstone pendant pulsed again, and Ka'el realized he was still wearing it outside his shirt. He tucked it quickly beneath the fabric, disturbed by its reaction to this stranger. The pendant had been his grandmother's, passed down through generations of his family as both blessing and warning. It was said to reveal the deepest truths of the heart, and right now it was telling him something he was not ready to hear. He built a fire quickly, his supernatural strength making easy work of the heavy logs he had stored in the chamber. The flames caught immediately, casting dancing light across the room and beginning to drive away the bitter cold that had settled into every corner of the castle. The woman's breathing was shallow and rapid, her body trying desperately to warm itself. Ka'el knew he needed to get her out of the wet clothes before hypothermia claimed her completely. He found clean linens in an old chest, fabric his mother had woven decades ago and somehow never used. With clinical efficiency, he removed her sodden cloak and gown, his eyes carefully averted as he wrapped her in dry cloth and warm blankets. Her skin was like ice to the touch, but her heart continued its stubborn rhythm. She was stronger than she appeared, this discarded daughter of nobility. Ka'el settled into a chair beside the bed, prepared for a long vigil. In his mortal life, he had sat beside enough sickbeds to know that the next few hours would determine whether she lived or died. The fire would help, but her body had to find the will to fight, and he sensed that her spirit had been as damaged as her flesh. As the hours passed, he found himself studying her face with growing fascination. Even unconscious, she possessed a dignity that spoke of strength beneath the fragility. Her features were refined but not weak. Her hands, now visible outside the blankets, showed calluses that suggested she was no pampered princess content to sit in solar and embroider. Dawn was breaking over the castle walls when she finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, and Ka'el leaned forward instinctively, then caught himself and remained still. He had no idea how she would react to waking in a stranger's bed, in a ruined castle, with a man she had never seen before, watching over her. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing irises the color of storm clouds. For a moment she seemed disoriented, her gaze moving from the unfamiliar ceiling to the crackling fireplace to his face. He expected screaming, or at least fear. Instead, she simply studied him with the same careful attention he had given her. "I'm not dead," she said finally, her voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. "No," Ka'el replied carefully, though it was a near thing. She tried to sit up, then winced and fell back against the pillows. "Where am I?" "Castle Nighthaven." He watched her face for recognition, but saw only mild curiosity. "My home. And you are?" "Ka'el." He hesitated, then added, "Lord Ka'el, though the title has little meaning these days." She nodded slowly, as if processing this information. "I am Lady Elira Thornfield, or I was until recently." The name meant nothing to him, but he could hear the pain in the way she spoke it. "What happened to you in those woods?" A shadow crossed her face, and for a moment he thought she would not answer. Then she said simply, "My family decided they had no further use for me." The matter-of-fact way she spoke those words hit him like a physical blow. He had expected some tale of bandits or wild animals, not this quiet admission of abandonment by those who should have protected her. So you walked into the forest to die, he said, and it was not a question. I walked into the forest because I had nowhere else to go. She met his eyes directly. If death was waiting there, it seemed no worse than the alternatives. Kael felt the bloodstone pendant pulse again, and this time he understood what it was trying to tell him. This woman carried the same deep wound that had driven him to isolation, the pain of being cast aside by those who claimed to love her, of being deemed unworthy of the very bonds that should have been unbreakable. "You saved my life," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Why?" It was a fair question, and one he had been asking himself since the moment he had lifted her from the snow. "I'm not certain," he admitted. "Perhaps I saw something familiar in your circumstances." She studied his face intently, and he wondered what she saw there. He had been told that his transformation had left him beautiful in the cold, inhuman way of his kind, too perfect, too symmetrical, too still. Most humans found him unsettling, even when they did not know what he was. But Elira showed no fear, only a thoughtful consideration that reminded him of scholars he had known in his mortal life. "You have the look of a man who has been alone for a very long time," she said finally. "Longer than you might imagine. And yet you chose not to let me die alone." She shifted slightly, testing her strength. "That suggests you are not as lost to solitude as you might believe." Kael found himself unsettled by her perceptiveness. Most humans saw only what they expected to see, either a lord in his castle or a monster to be feared. This woman seemed to see past both images to something deeper. "You should rest," he said, standing abruptly. "Your body has been through a terrible ordeal. Will you leave?" The question came out more quickly than she had intended, and he could see her flush with embarrassment at revealing such vulnerability. "Not far," he promised, and was surprised by how much he meant it. "There is food in the kitchens, and I can bring you some broth when you're ready." She nodded gratefully, then settled back into the pillows. "Lord Kael, thank you for choosing kindness when you might have chosen indifference." He paused at the doorway, struck by her words. Kindness. When had anyone last accused him of that? "Rest now, Lady Elira. Tomorrow we can discuss what comes next." As he closed the door behind him, Kael felt the bloodstone pendant settle into a steady, warm pulse against his chest. For the first time in decades, the castle did not feel quite so empty, and he was not entirely certain that was a good thing. But as he made his way to the kitchens to prepare food for his unexpected guest, he found himself humming a tune he had not remembered in centuries, a lullaby his mother had sung to him during his own recovery from childhood illness, in this same room where another lost soul now fought to heal. Perhaps some things once thought dead could be awakened after all. The healing herbs pouch lay open on the wooden table beside Elira's bed, its contents spreading a familiar earthy scent throughout the chamber. Kael had gathered these plants over countless seasons: feverfew for reducing inflammation, willow bark for pain, chamomile for peaceful sleep. He had never expected to use them for a human guest, yet here he was, carefully measuring portions as his mother had taught him centuries ago. "You seem to know a great deal about healing," Elira observed from the bed, watching him work with steady hands. 3 days had passed since her rescue, and though she was still weak, her color had returned and her appetite was slowly improving. "Necessity teaches many skills when one lives alone," Kael replied, not quite a lie, but not the full truth either. He could hardly explain that he had learned these arts during his mortal youth, when he had planned to serve as a field surgeon in his father's army. She accepted the steaming cup he offered, inhaling the fragrant steam. "This smells like my grandmother's garden. She used to brew something similar when I was ill as a child." "Grandmothers often possess the deepest wisdom," he said, settling into the chair he had claimed as his own over the past few days. "They understand that healing encompasses more than just the body." Elira sipped the tea thoughtfully, her storm-grey eyes studying him over the rim of the cup. "You speak as someone who has known loss. Family?" The question caught him off guard. In 3 centuries, no one had asked about his family with such gentle directness. Most people either knew the legends of House Nighthaven's fall or were too afraid to inquire. "Long gone," he said simply. "I'm sorry." Was it plague? War? Something like that. He stood abruptly, uncomfortable with the sympathy in her voice. "You should rest more. Your body is still recovering." But Elira set down her cup and fixed him with a look that reminded him uncomfortably of his mother's ability to see through his evasions. "You have been kind to me, Lord Kael, but you haven't been honest. This castle has been empty for decades, perhaps longer. You wear clothes that are well made, but decades out of fashion. And you move through these ruins as if you remember them in their glory." Kael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you are not what you appear to be." Her voice was calm, curious, rather than accusatory. "But neither am I, so perhaps we are well matched in our secrets." He turned back to face her, studying her expression for signs of fear or revulsion. Instead, he found only the same thoughtful attention she had shown him since awakening. "And what is it you think you see?" "A man who has lived longer than any mortal should, who knows healing arts that take decades to master, who chooses isolation not from misanthropy, but from some deeper wound that time has not been able to heal." The accuracy of her assessment left him momentarily speechless. "You're not afraid." "Should I be?" She pulled the blankets higher around her shoulders. "You've saved my life when you could have let me die. You've tended my illness with gentle hands. You could have harmed me 12 times over these past days if that had been your intent." Kael found himself sitting down again, drawn by her unexpected acceptance. "Most people would be terrified. Most people have not been cast aside by their own families for failing to fulfill their biological purpose." Elira's voice carried a bitter edge. "When you have already been deemed a monster by those who claim to love you, meeting an actual one seems almost refreshing in its honesty." The words hung in the air between them, and Kael felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the careful barriers he had built around his heart. "I am not entirely what legends claim. Legends are rarely accurate. They're written by those who fear what they cannot understand." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes intent on his face. "Tell me what you are, not what others say you are." For a long moment, Kael wrestled with himself. 3 centuries of secrecy warred with an unexpected desire to be known, truly known, by another soul who understood rejection and isolation. Finally, he reached beneath his shirt and drew out the bloodstone pendant. "My grandmother called this the heart's truth," he said, holding it so that the firelight caught its deep red surface. "She said it would reveal what mattered most when the time came to choose between fear and love. It's beautiful." Elira's eyes fixed on the pendant, "and it's warm." "Yes." He met her gaze. "It has been cold for decades, until the night I found you." Understanding dawned in her expression, but instead of pulling away, she extended her hand toward the pendant. "May I?" Kael hesitated, then leaned forward so she could touch the stone. The moment her fingers made contact, the pendant flared with warm light, and both of them gasped at the sensation that passed between them: recognition, completion, a sense of finding something long lost. "What was that?" Elira whispered, her hand still touching the stone. "I don't know," Kael admitted. "The pendant has never reacted so strongly to anyone." She pulled her hand back slowly, but her eyes remained locked on his. "Your grandmother's gift, what did she mean about choosing between fear and love?" "She said that when the heart recognizes its true match, we can either flee in terror from the depth of that connection, or embrace it despite the risks." He tucked the pendant back beneath his shirt. "She died before I could understand what she meant." "And now?" Kael studied her face, the delicate features that spoke of noble birth, the eyes that held depths of understanding beyond her years, the mouth that curved with gentle humor, even in the face of hardship. Now I begin to suspect she was wiser than I realized. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly in the grate. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the ancient shutters and reminding them both of the harsh world beyond these walls. "What will happen to me?" Elira asked eventually. "When I'm strong enough to travel, I mean. I have nowhere to go, no family to return to." "You could stay," Kael heard himself say, the words escaping before he could stop them. She looked at him with surprise. "In a ruined castle with a man who admits he is not entirely human. The alternative is returning to a world that has already rejected you." He leaned forward, earnestness creeping into his voice. "Here, you could be safe, fed, protected, free to become whoever you choose to be rather than what others demand. And you, what would you gain from such an arrangement?" The honest answer was too dangerous to voice that for the first time in centuries the thought of solitude felt like a burden rather than a blessing. Instead, he said, "Company. Conversation with someone who sees beyond surfaces to the truth beneath." Elira was quiet for so long that Kael began to fear he had overstepped. But when she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "I would need to understand what you are, truly. No more evasions or half-truths. That would be dangerous knowledge." "I am already dangerous," she replied with a slight smile. "A woman with nothing left to lose, who has nowhere else to go. What could be more terrifying to your average nobleman?" Despite himself, Kael found himself smiling in return. "You make a compelling argument. Then perhaps when I'm stronger, you'll tell me your story, and I'll decide whether this ruined castle might become something other than a prison for us both." The mirror of truth stood in what had once been Kael's father's study, its silver surface now tarnished with age, but still capable of revealing what lay hidden in the depths of one's soul. Kael had avoided this room for decades, unwilling to confront what the enchanted glass might show him. But tonight, with Elira finally strong enough to walk the castle halls, he found himself drawn back to face old ghosts. "This was my father's favorite room," he told her, as they stood in the doorway together. Elira had insisted on exploring the castle despite his protests about her health, and he had found himself strangely proud to show her the remnants of his family's legacy. "He was a scholar as well as a lord?" she asked, taking in the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that still held volumes despite decades of neglect. He believed knowledge was the truest form of power. Kael moved carefully into the room, dust motes dancing in the pale afternoon light. "He used to say that armies could be defeated, treasures could be stolen, but wisdom once gained could never be taken away." Elira ran her fingers along the spine of an ancient tome, her touch reverent. "My father thought books were a waste of time for women. He said they filled our heads with impractical notions. Your father was a fool." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. Elira turned to look at him, one eyebrow raised in gentle amusement. "You sound quite certain of that. Any man who would cast aside a daughter of your intelligence and strength has clearly never learned the value of what he possessed." Kyle moved to stand beside her at the bookshelf. "In the old days, noble ladies were expected to be as well educated as their brothers. My own mother could debate philosophy with visiting scholars and calculate the household accounts with equal skill. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Kael's hand moved unconsciously to the bloodstone pendant beneath his shirt. "She would have liked you, I think." She had little patience for those who judged worth by bloodline alone. They continued their exploration of the room in comfortable silence, Elira occasionally pulling books from the shelves to examine their contents, while Kael straightened furniture and cleared dust from surfaces. It felt strangely domestic, this shared restoration of his family's space, and he found himself imagining what the room might look like if it were properly cleaned and inhabited again. "What is this?" Elira's voice held a note of curiosity, and Kael looked up to see her standing before the covered mirror. "Something better left alone," he said quickly, but she was already reaching for the cloth that concealed its surface. More secrets, Lord Carl. I thought we had agreed to honesty between us. Before he could stop her, she pulled away the covering, revealing the mirror's silvered surface. For a moment, it showed only their reflections, Kael's unnaturally pale features and Elira's still fragile beauty. Then the magic stirred, and the surface began to shimmer like water. "It's enchanted," Elira breathed, stepping closer despite Kael's sharp intake of breath. "The mirror of truth," he confirmed reluctantly. "It shows one's deepest desires, not always kindly. Have you looked into it recently?" "Not for decades. I found the visions too painful." Elira studied his reflection in the glass, then her own. "What did it show you before?" Kael was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My family, alive and whole, my mortal life restored, everything I had lost. And now—" She met his eyes in the mirror. "What do you think it would show you now?" Before he could answer, the mirror's surface rippled and the reflection changed. Instead of the dusty, abandoned study, it showed the same room as it might be, windows open to let in spring sunshine, fresh flowers in vases, books organized and well-tended. And in the center of the vision, Kael and Elira sat together at the great desk, her head bent over a manuscript while he read aloud from another volume. They both stared at the image in stunned silence. In the mirror's vision, Kael looked more alive than he had in centuries, while Elira glowed with a contentment she had never known in her mortal life. "Is that what you want?" Elira asked softly. "This life, with me?" The vision shimmered and changed, showing them walking together through restored gardens, sharing meals in the great hall, standing together on the castle's highest tower as the sun set over the mountains. In each scene, they looked not like lord and guest, but like partners, companions, equals in a life built together. "I didn't realize," Kael said, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I had learned to want nothing, to need nothing." Elira turned away from the mirror to face him directly. "And I thought I had accepted that I would never be valued for anything beyond my ability to bear children." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of silver in her grey eyes. "But the mirror shows us choosing each other, not out of duty or necessity, but because we see something worthy in one another." Elira. Her name escaped him like a prayer, and he found himself reaching for her face, his fingers tracing the delicate line of her jaw. "You don't understand what you're considering. I am cursed, bound to this existence for eternity. To care for me is to choose a life apart from your own kind." "My own kind cast me aside," she reminded him, her hand coming up to cover his. "They deemed me worthless because I could not fulfill their expectations. But you saved me when you had every reason to let me die. You've shown me kindness without expecting anything in return. You see value in my mind, my spirit, not just my body. If we do this," Kael said, his forehead touching hers, "there will be no going back. The world will never accept what we build together. Then perhaps it's time to stop seeking the world's acceptance and start building something worthy of our own." The mirror shimmered again, and for just a moment it showed them as they stood now, two damaged souls finding healing in each other's presence, choosing hope over resignation, connection over solitude. Kael's lips found hers in a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, both were breathing heavily, the weight of their decision settling between them like a benediction. "Stay," he whispered against her hair. "Not as my guest, but as my partner. Help me bring life back to these halls." "Yes," she whispered back, and the mirror behind them reflected their embrace, the first moment of the new life they would build together, founded not on bloodlines or duty, but on choice and genuine affection. Outside, the first signs of spring were beginning to show despite the lingering winter, and inside the castle walls, two hearts that had been thought permanently broken began to remember how to hope. The Chronicle of Forgotten Names lay open on Kael's desk, its yellowed pages filled with centuries of careful script documenting every soul who had turned away from him in fear or disgust. Elira found him there on a grey morning in early spring, hunched over the leather-bound tome with the concentrated intensity of a monk copying sacred texts. "What is that?" she asked gently, settling into the chair across from him. 2 months had passed since their first kiss, and she had learned to recognize the signs when old pain surfaced in his eyes. "A record," he said without looking up. "Every name, every face, everyone who chose to see monster instead of man." Elira leaned forward to read the entries, her heart sinking as she took in page after page of careful documentation. Lords who had once called Kael friend, servants who had fled screaming at his transformation, even clergy who had declared him beyond redemption. Each name was written in the same precise hand, with dates and brief notes about their rejection. "Kael," she said softly, "why do you keep this?" "So I wouldn't forget. So I wouldn't make the mistake of hoping again." His finger traced one particular entry. "Lord Marcus Raven Shollow rode with me in 3 campaigns. When word of my curse reached him, he put a price on my head." Elira's breath caught. "Marcus, my former husband?" Kael's eyes snapped up to meet hers. "You were married to Marcus of Raven's Hollow?" "For 3 years." She studied his face, seeing new depths of pain there. "He was your friend." "My closest companion for nearly a decade. We trained together, fought together, shared everything." Kael's voice was hollow. "When my family fell to the curse, I thought surely he would understand that I was still the same man beneath the transformation. But he didn't. He led the first hunting party himself." Kael closed the chronicle carefully. "I barely escaped with my life." They sat in heavy silence, the weight of this revelation settling between them. Elira felt a strange dizziness, as if the foundations of her understanding had shifted. "All this time, you knew who I was, whose wife I had been." "Not at first, but when you told me your name, when you mentioned your marriage to a Lord Marcus, yes, I knew." Kael finally met her eyes again. "Does it change things, knowing that your former husband tried to kill me?" Elira considered this carefully. "Marcus showed me kindness during our marriage, but it was the kindness one shows a valuable possession. He never saw me as an equal, never valued my thoughts or dreams." She reached across the desk to cover Kael's hand with her own. "You have shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued. That matters more than ancient grievances." Relief flickered across Kael's features, but the pain remained. "There are so many names in this book, Elira. Centuries of rejection and betrayal. How do you maintain faith that people can choose differently?" Before she could answer, a commotion in the courtyard below drew their attention to the window. Kael stiffened, his supernatural hearing picking up sounds that Elira could not yet detect. "Riders," he said grimly, armed and moving with purpose. They hurried to the window and looked down to see a group of men in leather armor dismounting in the courtyard. Their leader wore the insignia of the church's military order, vampire hunters, trained and blessed specifically to hunt Kael's kind. "How did they find you?" Elira whispered. "Someone talked." Kael's expression hardened. "There are always those willing to sell information for coin, even information decades old." The hunters were examining the castle's entrance, clearly planning their approach. Elira counted 8 men, all well-armed and moving with the confidence of those who had hunted supernatural creatures before. "You have to run," she said urgently. "Use whatever escape routes this castle offers." But Kael shook his head. "I've run for 3 centuries. Elira, I'm tired of running. Then we fight them off together." The fierce protectiveness in her voice startled them both. Kael turned to stare at her. "You would stand with me, against the church's hunters? You saved my life when the world had discarded me. You've shown me a future I never dared imagine." Elira's grey eyes blazed with determination. These men see you as a monster to be destroyed. I know you as the man who tends herb gardens and reads poetry and carries me to bed when I fall asleep by the fire." Kael felt something shift inside his chest. A loosening of bonds he had not even realized still constrained him. For centuries he had faced every threat alone, every betrayal in isolation. The thought of someone choosing to stand beside him, to share both the danger and the defiance, was almost overwhelming. "They will try to convince you that I have enchanted you," he warned, "that no sane woman would choose to protect a vampire. Let them try." Elira moved to the weapons case that held Kael's father's ceremonial sword. "I have discovered that I am quite capable of making my own choices, regardless of what others think is sane." Together, they prepared for the confrontation that would determine whether their newly found happiness could survive the hatred of the outside world. Kael armed himself with weapons he had not touched in decades, while Elira proved surprisingly skilled with both blade and strategy. "There's something else," Kael said as they made their final preparations, "about the names in that chronicle." Elira looked up from adjusting her borrowed armor. "What about them?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about maintaining faith in people's ability to choose differently." He opened the chronicle again, but this time he reached for a quill. "Perhaps it's time to start a new record. Names of those who chose to see past the surface to the man beneath." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Starting with—" Kael dipped the quill in ink and wrote carefully at the top of a fresh page. "Lady Elira Thornfield chose love over fear, companionship over safety, truth over comfortable lies." "And the second entry?" she asked, softly. He smiled, the expression transforming his austere features. "That remains to be written, but I find myself curious to see who else might surprise us." The sound of the great doors splintering echoed through the castle, followed by the hunters' shouted demands for Kael's surrender. Instead of the familiar cold dread, Kael felt something he had not experienced in centuries: hope that this confrontation might end differently than all the others. For the first time, he would not face his enemies alone. The phoenix feather lay on the ancient altar in the castle's highest tower, its iridescent surface catching the last rays of sunset like captured fire. Kael had found it among his grandmother's most precious possessions, kept safe in a hidden chamber behind the library. Legend claimed that such feathers could grant one perfect wish, but only to those who truly understood what they desired most. "I can't take it," Elira said, though her eyes remained fixed on the magnificent artifact. "One wish that could restore your mortality, break whatever curse binds you to this existence." Kael studied her face in the fading light. 3 days had passed since the hunters' attack, 3 days since they had emerged, victorious but changed. The battle had revealed strengths in both of them they hadn't known existed, but it had also brought unwelcome news from the outside world. "It could," he agreed, "but I'm not certain that's what I would wish for anymore." Below them in the courtyard, the evidence of their victory remained abandoned weapons and trampled earth where they had made their stand together. But the hunters had carried word of Kael's continued existence back to the world, and with it, dangerous news about Elira's survival. "My father is offering a substantial reward for information leading to my return," she said, voicing the concern that had haunted them both since they'd interrogated their captives. "King Aldrich's nephew still seeks a wife, and apparently my presumed death has made me more valuable, not less. Nothing quite like tragedy to enhance a woman's romantic appeal." Kael moved to stand beside her at the tower's edge, looking out over the lands that had sheltered them through the winter months. "They see you as property to be reclaimed, while you see me as a person capable of making her own choices." Elira turned to face him fully. "That's why I could never use that feather to force a change in your nature. You've never tried to change me, never demanded that I become something other than what I am. You're not the one bound by an ancient curse. Aren't I?" Her voice carried a bitter edge. "I'm bound by the expectations of my gender, my class, my bloodline. The only difference is that your curse is magical while mine is social. Kael considered this, recognizing the truth in her words. What would you wish for if you could change your circumstances? Elira was quiet for a long moment, her fingers trailing along the stone battlements. I used to think I would wish to be able to bear children, to fulfill the role that was expected of me. But spending these months with you has shown me that there are many ways to create a family, many ways to leave a legacy. And now I think I would wish for the wisdom to know when to fight and when to walk away. She met his eyes. Because I fear we're about to face choices that will define the rest of our lives. As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley. But this was no small group of hunters, this was a full retinue, banners flying in the evening breeze. Kael's enhanced vision picked out the details first. The royal colours of King Aldrich, the Thornfield family crest, and most disturbing of all, the black and silver of House Ravenshallow. "Marcus," he said grimly. Elira followed his gaze and paled. "He's with them. My former husband rides with my family to reclaim me." They watched in tense silence as the party made camp at the forest's edge, just outside the range of Kael's territory, but close enough to make their intentions clear. Torches flared to life as darkness fell, and even from their great height they could see the bustle of men preparing for siege. "They mean to wait us out," Kael observed, "force us to come to them or starve us into submission. There's another possibility." Elira's voice was carefully controlled. "They might be willing to negotiate. What could they possibly offer that we would want? Safe passage, a chance to disappear completely, to find some remote corner of the world where we could live in peace." She paused, studying his expression. "That's what a reasonable person would want, isn't it? To avoid bloodshed and find a quiet life together." Kael heard the question beneath her words. "But you don't want to run any more than I do. I spent my entire life trying to meet other people's expectations, trying to become small enough to fit into the space they carved out for me." Elira's voice grew stronger with each word. "I won't go back to that, not even for safety. They'll say I've corrupted you, turned you against your own family through dark magic. Let them say it. We know the truth." She moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the determination blazing in her eyes. "You've never used magic to influence my feelings. Every choice I've made has been freely given." Kael felt the familiar weight of the bloodstone pendant against his chest, warm with the strength of their connection. "If we refuse to go with them, this will escalate. There will be war. Then perhaps it's time for war." Elira's words surprised them both with their quiet fierceness, not for conquest or territory, but for the right to choose our own destiny. The phoenix feather caught the moonlight, seeming to pulse with inner fire. Kael picked it up carefully, feeling its power thrum against his palm. "If we do this, if we make our stand here, there may be no going back. The world will see us as rebels against the natural order. The natural order that says women are property and different species cannot love. Perhaps that order needs to be challenged." Elira placed her hand over his, both of them touching the feather. "What do we wish for, Kael? What do we want most in all the world?" The feather flared with brilliant light, and in that moment, both of them saw the same vision, not a quiet life of hiding and compromise, but something grander and more dangerous. They saw themselves as founders of a new way of thinking, protectors of other outcasts, creators of a sanctuary where different kinds of love could flourish without fear. "The right to exist as we choose," Kael said softly. "The power to protect others like us, and the courage to fight for a world where love matters more than law." The feather dissolved in their joined hands, its magic settling into their bones like a benediction and a challenge. When the light faded, they looked down at the enemy camp with new eyes, not as victims facing inevitable defeat, but as warriors about to change the world. "Tomorrow we give them our answer," Elira said. "Together," Kael agreed, and the word carried the weight of a vow. The Blood Covenant scroll lay hidden beneath centuries of dust in the deepest vault of Castle Nighthaven, its crimson ink still vivid against the ancient parchment. Kael had not intended to show it to Elira, had not even remembered its existence until this morning, when the bloodstone pendant had grown so hot against his chest that it nearly burned him. "What is it?" Elira asked, following him down the narrow stone steps into the castle's foundations. The air here was thick with age and magic, making the torch flames dance strangely in the darkness. "Something my grandmother left behind, something I was meant to find only when the time was right." Kael's voice echoed strangely in the confined space. "I think I understand now why the bloodstone has been reacting so strongly to your presence." They reached the vault door, its iron surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the torchlight. Kael pressed his hand against the cold metal, and the ancient locks clicked open at his touch. Inside, the small chamber was filled with artifacts from his family's past weapons, jewelry, books bound in leather that predated written history. But it was the scroll case in the center of the room that drew their attention, glowing with the same warm light as the bloodstone pendant. "Kael," Elira whispered, her voice tight with sudden apprehension. "What aren't you telling me?" He opened the case with trembling hands, unfurling the scroll carefully on the small altar that dominated the chamber. The text was written in multiple languages, some so ancient that Kael had to reach deep into memories from his mortal education to translate them. "It's a covenant," he said slowly, his eyes scanning the elaborate script. "A binding made by my ancestor, Lord Damon Nighthaven, nearly 5 centuries ago. A covenant with whom? With fate itself." Kael's voice was barely above a whisper. "Read this passage here." Elira leaned closer, following his finger as he pointed to a section written in more modern script. "Let the blood of Nighthaven be bound in service to the blood of Thornfield, until such time as love conquers the pride that tears them asunder. Let the cursed one wander in darkness until he finds the lost daughter of the ancient line, and in finding her, finds redemption for both their houses." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Elira straightened slowly, her face pale in the torchlight. "Thornfield. My family's name is Thornfield." "Yes." Kael continued reading, his voice growing stronger as the full meaning became clear. "It says here that Lady Morgana Thornfield was betrothed to Lord Damon, but their family's pride prevented the union. She died unwed, while he was cursed by her father to walk in darkness until one of her bloodline could forgive the ancient grievances." "That's impossible. You said you've been cursed for 3 centuries, not 5. "The curse has been passed down through the Nighthaven line." Kael met her eyes across the scroll. "Each generation has carried the burden, waiting for the right moment, the right person. I am not the first vampire in my family, Elira. I am simply the one fated to meet you." She stepped back from the altar, her mind reeling. "Are you saying that everything our meeting, my exile, your finding me in the woods was predetermined?" "According to this covenant, yes." Kael's expression was tortured. "But there's more." He pointed to another passage, this one illuminated with gold ink that seemed to pulse with its own light. "The lost daughter shall be known by her apparent barrenness, for her womb shall be sealed by magic until she finds her true mate. Only in the union of cursed and blessed blood can both lines find peace." Elira sank onto a stone bench, the implications washing over her in waves. "My infertility? It wasn't natural. It was protection. The covenant bound your bloodline to remain pure until the time of redemption." Kael moved to kneel before her, his hands gently taking hers. "Elira, you were never barren. The magic was waiting for this moment, for us. How can you be certain?" Kael pressed his hand to the bloodstone pendant, which flared with brilliant light. "Because I can feel the change in you already. The covenant is awakening, recognizing what we've chosen together." As if summoned by his words, warmth spread through Elira's body, not the heat of fever or embarrassment, but something deeper, more fundamental. She gasped as she felt something shift inside her, barriers that had existed since birth, dissolving like ice in spring sunshine. "I can feel it," she whispered, her hand moving instinctively to her abdomen. "Something is different. The scroll says that when the covenant is fulfilled, both curses will be lifted. Your fertility will return, and my immortality will be tempered with the ability to choose mortality when the time comes." Kael's voice was filled with wonder. "We could have a true life together, Elira. Children, aging, death when we choose it, rather than when it's forced upon us." But even as hope bloomed in her chest, questions arose. If this was all fated, then what about choice? What about free will? Have we been puppets dancing to someone else's design? Kael considered this carefully. The covenant provided opportunity, but not obligation. You could have chosen to fear me, to flee from me, to reject what we found together. I could have let you die in the forest, or driven you away once you recovered. Every step of our relationship has been a choice we made freely. The magic brought us together, but love kept us together, Elira said, understanding dawning in her voice. Exactly, Kael stood and drew her up with him. And now we face the ultimate choice. Do we embrace what the covenant offers, knowing that our union will forever change both our bloodlines, or do we reject it and forge our own path, regardless of magical destiny? Before Elira could answer, the sound of horns echoed from the courtyard above. The negotiation party from her family had arrived, and with them came voices she recognized: her father's imperious tones, Marcus's diplomatic smoothness, and underneath it all, the unmistakable authority of someone who spoke with the king's voice. "They're here," she said unnecessarily. "Yes." Kael began rolling up the scroll carefully. "And they have no idea what we've just discovered. What do we tell them?" Kael met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw all the love and determination that had grown between them over these precious months. "We tell them the truth, that their political maneuvering and ancient prejudices mean nothing compared to the love that has awakened between us, that we are not bound by their expectations, but by choices we've made freely. And if they don't accept that, then we show them that some covenants are stronger than the laws of men." Kael offered her his arm. "Shall we go inform your family that their discarded daughter has become the key to breaking a 500-year-old curse?" Elira took his arm, feeling the warmth of the covenant's magic flowing between them like a shared heartbeat. "Let's go change the world." Together, they climbed the stairs toward whatever confrontation awaited, carrying with them the knowledge that their love was not just personal happiness, but the fulfillment of ancient prophecy and the promise of new beginnings for both their bloodlines. The Unity Chalice sat on the great hall's high table like a bridge between two worlds, its silver surface etched with symbols that seemed to dance in the candlelight. Kael had retrieved it from his family's most sacred vault after discovering the covenant, knowing that if they were to make their stand, they would need every advantage the old magic could provide. "It's beautiful," Elira said, though her voice carried the tension they both felt as they prepared for the confrontation that would determine their fate. "My great-grandmother used it to bind souls across the boundaries of life and death," Kael explained, adjusting the ceremonial robes he had not worn in centuries. "If we drink from it together, our bond becomes unbreakable, even by death itself. And if we don't survive what's coming, then we face whatever comes next together." Kael met her eyes across the great table they had spent the morning preparing for the formal negotiation. "But I believe we will survive, Elira. More than that, I believe we will triumph." The great hall had been transformed over the past 3 days into something approaching its former glory. Tapestries had been cleaned and rehung, the massive fireplace kindled to warm the ancient stones, and fresh rushes spread across the floor. It was still a ruin compared to what it had once been, but it no longer looked like the lair of a monster. It looked like the home of a lord receiving important guests. Outside, the sounds of the approaching party grew louder. Kael's supernatural hearing picked out individual voices, Lord Edmund's complaints about the condition of the roads, Marcus's calm directions to his men, and underneath it all, the measured tones of someone accustomed to speaking with absolute authority. "The king's nephew is with them," Kael reported. "Lord Garrett himself." "Of course he is." Elira smoothed her gown, one of her mother's, that had been preserved in the castle stores, altered to fit her smaller frame. "They're not taking any chances. If they can't convince me to return willingly, they want the royal authority to compel me. Let them try." Kael's voice carried a confidence that had been building ever since they discovered the Covenant. "They have no idea what they're truly facing." The great doors opened with a groan of ancient hinges, and the delegation entered with all the pomp they could muster in such surroundings. Lord Edmund Thornfield led the procession, his face a mask of paternal concern that didn't quite hide his calculation. Behind him came Marcus, looking older than when Kael had known him, but still carrying himself with military bearing. And finally, Lord Garrett, young, handsome, and radiating the casual arrogance of someone born to power. But it was the fourth member of the party that surprised them both. Father Benedict, the kingdom's most respected scholar of ancient law and magical contracts, followed the nobles with the measured pace of someone who understood they were walking into something far more significant than a simple family dispute. "Daughter," Lord Edmund's voice carried across the hall like a judgment, "we have come to bring you home." Elira rose from her seat at the high table, every inch the lady she had been raised to be. "Father, Lord Marcus, Lord Garrett, Father Benedict," she nodded to each in turn, her voice perfectly controlled. "Welcome to Castle Nighthaven. This is not a social call, Elira." Marcus stepped forward, his tone gentle but firm. "We know you have been through a terrible ordeal. This creature has clearly used dark magic to cloud your judgment, to make you believe that staying here is your choice." "Has he?" Elira's eyebrow arched in the same way it had when she challenged Kael's evasions months ago. "And what dark magic would that be?" "Precisely." Lord Garrett moved to stand beside Marcus, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. "The magic all vampires possess, the ability to enthrall their victims, to make them willing slaves to unholy appetites." Kael had remained seated throughout the exchange, his posture relaxed, but his eyes watchful. Now he rose slowly, and even the young lord took an unconscious step backward as the full weight of Kael's presence filled the hall. "I see my reputation precedes me," Kael said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the great hall. "Though I wonder which version you've heard, the one where I'm a mindless monster, or the one where I'm a master manipulator. They seem somewhat contradictory." "We know what you are," Lord Edmund declared, "and we know what you've done to our daughter." "What I've done," Kael repeated thoughtfully, "is save her life when her own family cast her aside like refuse. I've given her shelter, respect, and the freedom to choose her own destiny. If that constitutes dark magic in your estimation, then perhaps the problem lies not with my nature, but with your expectations." Father Benedict stepped forward, his scholarly robes rustling against the stone floor. "Lord Kael, for I assume that is still your preferred title, you speak of choice, but can there truly be choice when one party holds such overwhelming power over the other?" It was a fair question, and Kael acknowledged it with a slight bow. "A wise concern, Father. But I would ask you to consider this. If I possess the power to enthrall Lady Elira, why would I allow her to arm herself in my presence? Why would I encourage her to speak her mind freely, even when she disagrees with me? Why would I have spent months helping her heal from wounds inflicted by those who claim to love her?" "Perhaps," Elira said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "you should ask me directly whether I am here by choice or compulsion." All eyes turned to her, and Kael felt a surge of pride at the way she commanded the room. This was not the broken woman he had found dying in the snow, but a lady who had discovered her own strength and was unafraid to use it. "I am here," she continued, Because Lord Ka'el saw value in me when my own family declared me worthless. I am here because he has never once tried to change me to suit his preferences, never demanded that I become anything other than myself. And I am here because I have found with him the kind of partnership I never knew was possible. Partnership? Lord Garrett's voice dripped with disdain. You speak of partnership with a monster. I speak of partnership with a man who has shown me more respect and genuine affection in 4 months than I received in 23 years of living among those who share my species. Elira's grey eyes blazed. If that makes me unnatural in your estimation, so be it. Marcus stepped forward, his expression pained. Elira, please. I know our marriage ended badly, but surely you cannot believe that this creature can give you what you truly want. A family, children, a normal life. And what do you know of what I truly want? Elira's voice was dangerously quiet. You discarded me when I could not bear your children. You never once asked what I dreamed of, what I hoped for, what I valued beyond my ability to continue your bloodline. Because your dreams don't matter. Lord Edmund's patience finally cracked. You are a Thornfield. Your duty is to your family, your bloodline, your king. This creature has filled your head with romantic nonsense, but reality remains. You belong with your own kind. The bloodstone pendant beneath Ka'el's robes pulsed with heat, and he felt the covenant stirring in response to the raw emotion in the hall. And what if she doesn't? He said quietly. What if she belongs exactly where she has chosen to be? Impossible, Lord Garrett declared. The natural order demands. The natural order, Father Benedict interrupted, his scholarly voice cutting through the mounting anger, is perhaps more complex than you assume, my lord. All heads turned toward the priest, who was studying Ka'el and Elira with the intense focus of someone solving a particularly challenging puzzle. There are ancient laws that supersede even royal decree, he continued. Covenants made in the old days, when magic flowed more freely through the world. Ka'el felt Elira's eyes on him, a silent question passing between them. This was the moment of truth. Reveal the covenant and change everything, or continue to fight this battle on conventional terms. Father Benedict, Ka'el said formally, you speak as one who has studied the old ways. Tell me, what do you know of binding covenants between ancient houses? The priest's eyes sharpened. I know that they supersede all other law, including royal authority. I know that they cannot be broken by force or decree, but only by the willing participation of those they bind. He paused, studying their faces. I also know that such covenants are exceedingly rare, and that most were sealed with blood and witnessed by powers older than any current kingdom. Ka'el reached into his robes and withdrew the ancient scroll, its crimson ink seeming to glow in the firelight. Then perhaps you would be so kind as to examine this document and tell us what authority it carries. The silence in the great hall was absolute, as Father Benedict accepted the scroll with trembling hands, his eyes widening as he read the ancient text. The others watched in growing confusion as the priest's expression shifted from scholarly interest to absolute amazement. This is impossible, he whispered. This covenant was sealed 500 years ago. By rights, it should have dissolved when the original parties died. Unless, Ka'el said quietly, the covenant was designed to transcend death and pass to the designated heirs. Father Benedict looked up from the scroll to study their faces with new understanding. Lord Ka'el of House Nighthaven, Lady Elira of House Thornfield. You are the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. The unity chalice on the table between them began to glow with the same warm light as the bloodstone pendant, and everyone in the hall could feel the power gathering like the moment before lightning strikes. What prophecy? Lord Edmund demanded, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. The prophecy that will change everything, Elira said, reaching for Ka'el's hand. The prophecy that proves our love is not rebellion against the natural order, but its ultimate fulfillment. The sword of mercy hung at Ka-El's side, its ancient blade humming with power that had nothing to do with its edge and everything to do with the wisdom embedded in its steel. His grandfather had commissioned it from the greatest smiths of the Old Kingdom, forging it not for conquest, but for justice, a weapon that could end lives without hatred, that could protect without becoming consumed by violence. Father Benedict finished reading the covenant aloud, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority as each word echoed through the great hall. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft crackle of flames in the massive fireplace and the distant sound of wind through broken stones. "This changes nothing," Lord Edmund declared, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Ancient contracts cannot supersede the authority of the crown." "Actually," Father Benedict said gently, "they can. This covenant predates the current royal line by 2 centuries. Under both canonical and secular law, it takes precedence over any subsequent claim." He rolled the scroll carefully, his movements reverent. "Lord Ka-El and Lady Elira are bound by sacred law that no earthly authority can dissolve." Lord Garrett's hand moved to his sword hilt, his young face flushing with anger. "This is madness. You ask us to honor a contract made with monsters, to allow this creature to corrupt a daughter of noble blood." "I ask you to honor the law," Father Benedict replied firmly, "the same law that gives you your own authority." "Enough!" Marcus stepped forward, his military bearing making him a natural leader even in this charged atmosphere. "Covenant or no covenant, Elira, you cannot truly believe this is what you want. A life hidden away in ruins, cut off from civilization, from your own kind." Elira moved to stand beside Ka-El, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The unity chalice on the table between them pulsed with warm light, responding to their proximity. "Marcus, you speak of my own kind as if species determines compatibility, but you and I shared a species, and we could not build a lasting happiness together. Because of your condition, because you saw me as broken." The words carried no heat, only truth. "Ka-El sees me as complete." "He has enchanted you," Lord Garrett insisted, his youth making him less diplomatic than the older men. "No rational woman would choose a monster over her own family." The bloodstone pendant grew hot against Ka-El's chest, and he felt the ancient magic of his bloodline stirring in response to the insult. For a moment, the old rage threatened to surface centuries of being called monster, demon, abomination. But then Elira's hand tightened on his arm, and he remembered the lesson the Sword of Mercy had taught his ancestors. That true strength lay not in unleashing power, but in controlling it. "You speak of choice, Lord Garrett," Ka-El said, his voice deadly quiet. "Tell me, what choice did you offer Lady Elira? The choice between marrying you or facing royal displeasure? The choice between accepting your suit or being declared a traitor to the crown?" The young lord flushed darker. "I offer her honor, position, a place in civilized society. You offer her another cage." Ka-El's hand moved to rest on the sword's pommel, not as a threat, but as a source of strength. "Perhaps decorated with finer bars than the last one, but a cage nonetheless." "And what do you offer?" Marcus challenged. "Love, poetry, and romantic gestures will not feed children or build a legacy." "Children!" Elira's voice carried a note that made everyone turn to look at her. "You speak so casually of children, as if I could simply choose to bear them for the right man." "Well, naturally, with proper care and the right circumstances," Marcus began, "there will be children." Elira's interruption silenced the hall. She looked directly at her father, her grey eyes blazing with quiet triumph. "The covenant ensures it. My apparent barrenness was never a medical condition, it was magical protection, waiting for the right time, the right partner." Lord Edmund staggered as if struck. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Father Benedict moved closer to examine the covenant again. The text specifically mentions the restoration of the Thornfield line through the union of cursed and blessed blood. Lady Elira's fertility was bound by the same magic that cursed Lord Kael's family. "You're talking about dark sorcery," Lord Garrett protested, his voice rising with panic. "I'm talking about a love so powerful it fulfilled a 500-year-old prophecy." Elira's voice rang with conviction. "I'm talking about two people who found in each other not just romance, but redemption for both their bloodlines." The unity chalice suddenly flared with brilliant light, and everyone in the hall felt the power wash over them like a tide. When the light faded, the chalice was filled with wine that had not been there moments before, wine that sparkled like liquid starlight. "The covenant recognizes their bond," Father Benedict whispered in awe. "The magic itself bears witness." Lord Edmund's face had gone pale, but his voice remained hard with authority. "Magic or no magic, prophecy or no prophecy, I will not see my daughter throw away her humanity for a monster." Kael felt the familiar weight of rejection, but this time it did not wound him as it once had. He had Elira beside him, the covenant as proof of their legitimacy, and most importantly, he had finally learned the difference between being feared and being respected. "Then," Kael said, drawing the sword of mercy with fluid grace, "you leave us no choice but to defend what is ours." The crown of stars materialized above the great hall like a constellation descended to earth, its ethereal light casting everything in silver radiance as the ancient magic reached its crescendo. No mortal hand had crafted this diadem. It was formed from pure celestial energy, appearing only when true love conquered the deepest curses and fulfilled the most sacred prophecies. Everyone in the hall fell silent, their weapons forgotten as they stared upward at the impossible sight. The crown rotated slowly, each star pulsing with the rhythm of two hearts beating in perfect synchrony, and its light seemed to wash away centuries of pain and misunderstanding. "Blessed saints," Father Benedict whispered, dropping to his knees. "I have read of such things in the oldest texts, but never thought to witness them." Kael felt the transformation beginning in his very bones, not a loss of his vampire strength and speed, but a tempering of them, a choice being offered. The curse that had bound his family for 5 centuries was unraveling, replaced by something far more precious: the freedom to choose between immortality and mortal life, to age alongside the woman he loved, or remain eternal as her protector. Elira gasped as warmth flooded through her, the magical barriers that had protected her bloodline finally dissolving. She could feel life stirring within her not yet conception, but the potential for it, the restoration of everything she had thought permanently lost. The covenant was fulfilling its promise, making her whole in ways she had never dared imagine. "This cannot be happening," Lord Edmund said, but his voice had lost all authority. "This is madness, sorcery. This is love," Elira said simply, reaching for Kael's free hand. The moment their fingers touched, the crown of stars blazed brighter, and everyone in the hall could feel the power that flowed between them, not compulsion or enchantment, but something pure and freely given. Lord Garrett drew his sword with a desperate cry. "I will not let witchcraft steal away what is rightfully mine." He lunged forward, but Kael moved with inhuman speed, the sword of mercy intercepting the attack before it could reach Elira. The two blades met with a ring like temple bells, and suddenly the hall was filled with the sound of clashing steel as guards loyal to the visiting nobles moved to support their lord. But this was no ordinary battle. As Kael fought, the sword of mercy began to glow with the same celestial light as the crown above them. Each strike he made was perfectly controlled, disabling rather than killing, protecting rather than destroying. The ancient weapon allowed him to defend their love without becoming consumed by hatred or rage. "Stop this," Marcus commanded his men, recognizing something that the younger lord could not. "Put up your weapons." But Lord Garrett was beyond reason, driven by pride and the fear of losing a prize he had never truly possessed. He pressed his attack with increasing desperation, forcing Kael to give ground to avoid seriously injuring the young man. "Garrett, enough!" Elira's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "You cannot force love through violence. You belong to our kind." He snarled, sweat streaming down his face as he fought against Kael's superior skill. "Not to this abomination." The crown of stars pulsed, and suddenly the hall was filled with visions, images of what could be if love were allowed to triumph over law and tradition. They saw Castle Nighthaven restored to its former glory, but transformed into something new, a sanctuary for those rejected by conventional society. They saw Kael and Elira's children growing up to bridge the gap between human and supernatural worlds. They saw a future where difference was celebrated rather than feared. Lord Edmund staggered under the weight of the visions, his face pale with the realization of what he had almost destroyed. "Elira," he whispered, "my daughter, what have we done to you?" "You gave me the gift of adversity," she replied gently, ducking as Lord Garrett's wild swing passed over her head. "Without it, I would never have discovered my true strength." Kael finally ended the combat by trapping Lord Garrett's blade against the stone wall, the sword of Mercy's point resting lightly against the young man's throat. But instead of striking the killing blow, Kael stepped back and lowered his weapon. "I will not take your life," he said quietly, "not when it would stain the beginning of ours." The crown of stars descended slowly, coming to rest just above Kael and Elira's joined hands. Its light bathed them both, and everyone watching could see the moment when their bond became more than human love, more than magical covenant. It became something eternal and unbreakable. "The curse is broken," Father Benedict announced, his voice filled with awe. 5 centuries of separation and pain, ended by 2 souls brave enough to choose love over fear. Lord Garrett's sword clattered to the ground as he finally understood the futility of fighting against destiny itself. Marcus sheathed his weapon with the careful movements of a soldier who recognized when a battle was truly over. And in the silence that followed, Kael and Elira looked into each other's eyes and saw not just the fulfillment of ancient prophecy, but the beginning of a love story that would inspire generations yet to come. The family tree tapestry hung in the great hall, where once only dust and shadows had reigned, its vibrant threads depicting not bloodlines traced through centuries of breeding, but connections chosen through love, loyalty, and shared purpose. 1 year had passed since the Covenant's fulfillment, and Castle Nighthaven had been transformed from a monument to isolation into a beacon of hope for those whom the world had discarded. Elira sat in the window seat of their restored chambers, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly where their first child grew strong and healthy. The morning sun streamed through glass that Kael had replaced pane by careful pain, casting rainbow prisms across the tapestry that told their story not as a tale of noble houses and ancient bloodlines, but as a chronicle of chosen family and deliberate love. "The delegation from the Eastern Kingdoms has arrived," Kael said, entering the chamber with the quiet grace that still made her heart quicken after all these months. 3 more families seeking sanctuary, and a scholar who claims to have found references to other ancient covenants. Other covenants? Elira looked up from the letter she had been writing. Correspondence had become a significant part of their daily routine, as word spread of what they had accomplished. "How many more star-crossed lovers do you suppose are wandering the world, waiting for someone to tell them their love is legitimate?" Kael settled beside her on the window seat, his hand joining hers on their unborn child. The bloodstone pendant, which now hung openly over his shirt, pulsed with gentle warmth at the contact. "Judging by the letters we've received, far more than the world would care to admit." Through the window, they could see the courtyard where their growing community went about the business of daily life. Former servants who had been dismissed for showing loyalty to supernatural masters worked alongside reformed criminals who had found redemption through honest labor. A family of half-fey children played with the human offspring of refugees, their laughter echoing off stone walls that had once known only silence. Your father sent another letter, Kael mentioned gently. Elira sighed, recognizing the careful tone he used when broaching difficult subjects. What does he want now? Forgiveness, mostly. And perhaps the chance to meet his grandchild when the time comes. Kael handed her the sealed missive. He's been working to change the succession laws in favor of merit rather than gender. Apparently, having a daughter who fulfilled an ancient prophecy has given him new perspective on the value of women. And Marcus has petitioned the king to establish formal diplomatic relations with our community. He believes that what we're building here could serve as a model for other kingdoms struggling with supernatural populations. Elira opened her father's letter, reading the careful script that had once pronounced her worthless. Now it spoke of pride, regret, and a request to sponsor the education of some of their refugee children at the kingdom's finest schools. He's trying, she said finally. It's more than I expected. People can change, Kael observed. Look at us. She laughed softly, thinking of the broken woman who had collapsed in the snow and the isolated vampire who had given up hope of connection. Look at us indeed. A knock at the door interrupted their quiet moment, and Brother Francis, the young monk who served as their secretary and liaison with the outside world, entered with his usual apologetic smile. Forgive the intrusion, my lord and lady, but we have visitors. A delegation from the northern clans, and they've brought someone you'll want to see. Kael and Elira exchanged glances. The northern clans were notoriously isolationist, sending envoys only when matters of greatest importance demanded attention. They made their way to the great hall, where the tapestry seemed to glow in the afternoon light, filtering through the restored windows. The northern delegation waited with the patient stillness of those accustomed to long councils, but it was the figure standing slightly apart that made them both stop in surprise. She was young, perhaps 19, with the pointed ears and ethereal beauty of the Fey folk. But her eyes held the same haunted quality that Elira remembered from her own darkest days, the look of someone who had been cast aside for failing to meet expectations. My lords, the delegation's leader said formally, may I present Lady Seraphina of the Moonwood Court. She has been exiled from her people for refusing an arranged marriage, and she carries a covenant scroll that bears remarkable similarities to your own. The young Fey woman stepped forward, her movements graceful despite her obvious fear. I have heard what you accomplished here, she said, her voice like silver bells. I hope that is, I was told perhaps there might be room for one more lost soul seeking a family of choice rather than blood. Elira felt tears spring to her eyes as she recognized the courage it had taken for this young woman to seek them out. She moved forward, extending her hands in welcome. There is always room here for those brave enough to choose love over duty, she said warmly. Come, let us hear your story. As the afternoon wore on and Seraphina shared her tale, Kael reflected on how far they had come from that winter night when he had found a dying woman in the snow. Their love had not only broken ancient curses, but had begun something entirely new, a place where the rejected and forgotten could build lives of meaning and purpose. That evening, as they prepared for bed in chambers that hummed with warmth and contentment, Elira paused before the tapestry that dominated one wall. Its latest addition showed the castle not as it had been in its original glory, but as it was now a sanctuary where difference was celebrated, where love took many forms, and where family was defined by choice rather than chance. What are you thinking? Kael asked, following her gaze. I'm thinking, she said, her hand moving to their unborn child, that our little one will never know what it feels like to be unwanted or unloved. And neither will any of the children who find their way to us. Kael wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they studied the tapestry together. They'll know they have value beyond what they can produce or provide, he agreed. They'll know that love, freely given, is the strongest magic of all. Outside their window, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the world, other lost souls were beginning journeys that might lead them home to the sanctuary that love had built from ancient curses and willing hearts.